The first time they laughed at her, it was early June, and the sun hung warm and golden over the valley like a promise no one doubted. Martha Hale stood behind her small cabin with her sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands deep in a basket of sliced apples. She laid them carefully across a stretched cloth frame she had built from scrap lumber and old screen. The air was already sweet with fruit and wood smoke. A thin curl of steam drifted from the kettle inside where she had been blanching peaches. Down the slope, 3 wagons creaked past on the road that cut through the valley. Men rode beside them, hats tilted back, wives perched on the seats. Children pointed, "Look at her." One of the men called, loud enough for the others to hear, "Summer's barely begun, and she's preparing for doomsday." Laughter followed, easy and careless. Martha did not look up. She shifted the apple slices so they would not overlap. Drying required space. Patience, discipline. Her husband, Thomas, had understood such things. He had been dead 9 months. The fever came through like a thief in the night the previous autumn, taking 2 children and 3 men before frost ever touched the grass. Thomas had burned bright and hot for 3 days, then gone quiet in a way that left the house echoing. Since then, Martha had lived alone on the small claim at the north edge of the valley, where the trees thickened toward the hills. The others said she should move closer to town, said a woman alone needed neighbors. But neighbors did not split wood at dawn. Neighbors did not check the roof seams twice before a storm. Neighbors did not listen for the sound of distant weather the way Thomas had taught her. Thomas had grown up in mountain country where winter did not knock politely before entering. "Store when the sun shines," he used to say. The sky can change its mind. So Martha dried apples in June. She dried peaches and apricots and plums. She sliced them thin and even. She strung beans on thread and hung them from the rafters. She salted meat carefully and set it in brine. She laid out herbs on clean cloth and turned them daily. The valley bustled around her in confidence. It had been 5 mild winters in a row. Snow had come late and melted early. The creek that fed their irrigation channels had run steady and kind. Crops had grown high. Wheat waved like golden water in the fields. Corn stood thick and proud. Men built bigger barns. Women planted flower beds by their doors. Children ran barefoot in the dust. Martha worked quietly behind her cabin, turning fruit in the sun. By mid-July, she had constructed a second drying rack. Old Mrs. Carrington stopped by one afternoon, parasol raised against the heat. "My dear," the older woman said, peering at the rows of peaches, "you'll exhaust yourself at this rate. There's plenty in the storehouse, and harvest will be strong again, you'll see." Martha wiped her brow with her forearm. "Strong harvests are no guarantee." Mrs. Carrington sniffed gently. "You sound like a pessimist." "No," Martha said softly, "I sound like someone who has seen a winter close early." The older woman shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we've all lost something." Martha nodded, but she remembered the winter of her childhood when the pass froze in October and the supply wagons never came. She remembered scraping the last flour from the barrel. She remembered her mother slicing thin shavings from a single potato to make it stretch across 3 bowls of soup. She remembered hunger like a constant ache behind the ribs, so she dried food in July. By August, her shelves were lined with glass jars of preserved tomatoes, peaches sealed in syrup, beans, corn, and squash. She had dug a deeper root cellar beneath the cabin floor, reinforcing the walls with stone. She had layered straw and sand for insulation. She had stacked potatoes carefully in crates so they would not bruise. She smoked strips of venison over slow coals for 2 days straight. The laughter grew louder. Planning to feed the entire territory, Martha. one man called as he rode by. Or are you expecting a siege? Another chimed in. She simply turned the meat so it would cure evenly. Even the younger women, who once admired her quiet steadiness, began to tease gently. You'll spoil your appetite worrying about winter in August, said Clara Whitfield one afternoon as they washed clothes by the creek. The traders come every month. The railroad's not far. We're not in the wilderness anymore. Martha wrung out a shirt and laid it flat against the rock. The wilderness doesn't need to be far, she said. It just needs to remember we're here. Clara laughed. You always speak like a riddle. But she noticed the way Martha studied the hills. September arrived with a strange stillness. The air cooled earlier than usual. The birds shifted their patterns. A restless wind began to sweep down from the north at dusk. Martha felt it before she could explain it. She harvested the last of her herbs and hung them to dry. She doubled the thickness of straw over the cellar hatch. She sealed cracks in the cabin walls with clay. The valley, meanwhile, prepared for the harvest festival. Music drifted across the fields. Lanterns were strung between posts. Tables groaned under pies and roasted meats. Martha attended because to stay away would invite sharper talk. She stood near the edge of the gathering, plate balanced in her hands. Someone tapped a spoon against a cup for attention. To another prosperous year, called Mr. Dunlap, who owned the largest wheat field in the valley. May the good times continue. Cheers rose, cups clinked. Maybe we should ask Martha if we ought to be celebrating. Someone joked. She might see a storm in the cake crumbs. Laughter rippled. Martha managed a small smile, but when she looked north beyond the lantern light, the hills seemed darker than they should. The first snow fell in early October. It was light, a teasing dusting that melted by noon. Children squealed and chased one another through it. The men declared it a fluke. Then came the second snow, heavier. It lingered in the shaded parts of the valley. Frost clung stubbornly to the ground even after sunrise. By late October, the supply wagon failed to arrive. That had happened once before when a wheel broke on the mountain pass. No one worried yet. It'll come next week, Mr. Dunlap said confidently. Next week, another storm rolled in. Not a gentle snowfall. A wall of white descended from the north with a wind that howled like something alive. It swallowed the hills. It buried the road. It filled the creek bed with ice. Snow fell for 2 days without pause. When it stopped, the valley lay under 3 feet of white. Men dug paths between cabins. They laughed breathlessly, calling it an early winter adventure. Then the wind shifted again. The temperature dropped so sharply that water froze in buckets indoors. The creek iced over completely, and when 2 men attempted to ride out toward the pass to see what delayed the wagon, they returned before noon, faces pale. The pass is gone, one said, drifts taller than a man, we couldn't see the markers, it'll clear, someone insisted. But the next storm came before the first drift settled. Snow layered upon snow. Wind carved it into walls. The sky stayed iron, gray for days. By mid-November the valley was cut off, no wagon, no trader, no word from beyond the hills. At first it felt like inconvenience, then like irritation, then like something else. The storehouse in town held grain, but not enough for months. The larger farms had reserves, but many had sold excess harvest early, trusting regular trade routes to fill gaps. "We'll ration," Mr. Dunlap announced in a gathering at the church. "There's no need for alarm." But alarm seeped in quietly. The cold did not break, it deepened. Livestock began to falter. Chickens stopped laying. One family lost a cow when it slipped on ice and broke a leg. Firewood piles shrank quickly under constant burning. Martha watched smoke rise thinly from distant chimneys and calculated. She counted her jars, her dried apples, her beans, her salted meat, her potatoes. She tightened her belt and reduced her own portions. In December, the first child fell ill from weakness. The doctor had little to offer beyond broth and rest. But broth required ingredients. By Christmas, the laughter had vanished from the valley. Faces grew drawn. Voices hushed. One evening, a knock sounded at Martha's door. She opened it to find Clara Whitfield, cheeks red from cold, eyes rimmed with worry. "I didn't know who else to ask." Clara whispered, "We've nearly nothing left. The boys, they're hungry." Martha stepped aside without hesitation. Inside, she lifted the cellar hatch and climbed down. Clara followed, gasping softly at the sight. Crates stacked neatly, jars lining shelves from floor to ceiling, bundles of dried herbs, sacks of beans. You truly meant to feed the territory," Clara breathed. Martha handed her a sack of potatoes and 2 jars of beans. "I meant to feed whoever winter forgot," she said. Word spread. The next day Mr. Dunlap himself came, hat in hand. "I misjudged you," he admitted quietly. "We all did." Martha did not gloat. There was no energy for that. She simply said, "We must organize, fair shares, no waste." Soon her cabin became a quiet center of distribution. She measured portions carefully, stretching supplies. She taught others how to soak dried beans properly, how to grind corn more finely, how to use herbs to flavor thin soups so they felt richer than they were. She showed them how to dry what little remained of their own stores near the hearth. The storms continued through January. Snow pressed high against cabin walls. The valley felt like the bottom of a white well. But people did not starve. They grew lean, they grew humbled. Children stopped laughing at the sight of Martha turning apple slices by firelight. One afternoon in February, as wind rattled the shutters, Mrs. Carrington sat by Martha's hearth and warmed her hands. "I thought you were fearful," the older woman said softly, "but you were faithful." "To what?" Martha asked. "To the truth," Mrs. Carrington replied. "That comfort is a season, not a promise." When at last the sky cleared in early March, it did so slowly, cautiously. The sun lingered longer each day. Snow began to sink. It took 2 weeks before a group of men could carve a narrow path toward the pass. When they reached the crest, they found wagons stranded and abandoned on the far side, drivers having turned back months before. The valley had been entirely alone. By April, the creek ran again. By May, green pushed through thawed earth. The valley looked the same as it had the previous summer, but it was not the same. When Martha set up her drying racks in June, no one laughed. In fact, several families built their own beside her. Children carried sliced fruit carefully. Men constructed larger frames. Women traded preservation methods. Even Mr. Dunlap spent afternoons salting meat under Martha's instruction. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the valley gold once more, Clara stood beside Martha watching rows of apples gleam in the light. "You saved us," Clara said quietly. Martha shook her head. "I prepared," she answered. "The saving was done by everyone who chose to learn." The wind moved gently through the trees. The valley breathed, alive and aware. And though laughter returned with the warmth, it was different now, softer, wiser. No one mistook summer for a guarantee again. And every year after that, when fruit ripened heavy on the branches and the sun felt endless, the valley could be seen dotted with drying racks. A quiet reminder that seasons turn, and that sometimes the one who prepares in silence is the one who carries everyone through the storm.